The moment an avoidant realizes they still want you, there's a moment, a silent, private moment, when someone who pushed you away, maybe even acted like you didn't matter, realizes they still want you. It doesn't happen while you're chasing them. It doesn't happen when you keep proving your worth. It happens when you stop reaching out, when your life gets louder than their silence, when you've finally chosen peace over potential. See, avoidant people often fear closeness, not because they don't feel, but because they do. Intimacy is their trigger, and when things get real, they often run, not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to stay. So what happens when you stop waiting? That's when they notice. That's when the texts feel colder without your warmth. That's when the jokes don't land because you're not there to laugh. That's when they realize the space they created isn't freedom, it's emptiness. The avoidant doesn't realize what they had. When you're pleading to be seen, they realize it when you finally see yourself clearly. When your standards speak louder than your apologies. When you stop trying to unlock a door that was never yours to force open. You remember your value in the silence after you stop explaining it. But here's the truth. The goal was never to get them to want you back. The goal is to value yourself enough that it doesn't matter if they do. And when that happens, they will want you. But by then, you might realize you no longer want them. Avoidant individuals often come across as emotionally distant, guarded, or even uninterested in forming close relationships. But the reality underneath that exterior is far more complex. It's not that they don't want love or that they don't care. In fact, many avoidant people long for connection just as deeply as anyone else. What they fear is not love itself, but the vulnerability that love demands, the closeness, the emotional exposure, the surrender of control. These are the things that make them feel unsafe. So instead of leaning in when things get emotionally intense, they pull away. They disconnect. They retreat into themselves, often leaving their partner feeling confused, rejected, and unworthy. This fear of vulnerability is often rooted in past experiences, sometimes from childhood, sometimes from previous relationships, where closeness may have led to disappointment, betrayal, or a loss of self. As a result, they develop coping mechanisms that allow them to feel in control. They rely on independence, on logic over emotion, on solitude. These strategies help them avoid pain, but they also block intimacy. They may seem self-sufficient, even indifferent, but beneath that is often a deep desire to be loved, understood, and accepted. Only they don't know how to make room for those feelings without also feeling threatened. When an avoidant person starts to get close to someone, especially someone who makes them feel seen or emotionally activated, their instinct might be to retreat, to test the boundaries of how much closeness they can tolerate. This is where the mixed signals begin. The hot and cold behavior, the emotional distance right after moments of intimacy, the confusion they leave in their wake. It's not a lack of feeling, it's a lack of emotional safety. Understanding this dynamic is not about excusing poor behavior or accepting less than you deserve. It's about recognizing that the avoidant person's detachment is not necessarily a reflection of your worth or the quality of the connection. Often, it's a defense mechanism, a way to self-protect. They might care deeply and still pull away because their blueprint for relationships tells them closeness equals danger. They fear being seen and not being enough. They fear needing someone and then being abandoned. They fear loving and losing. So they create distance before you can hurt them. But in doing so, they often hurt the very people they care about. And until they learn to face that fear, to sit with the discomfort of intimacy, they'll keep running from the very thing they secretly crave. There's a strange irony in human behavior. We often only recognize what's valuable once it's no longer available to us. This is especially true when dealing with someone with avoidant tendencies. While you're present, offering your love, your time, your effort, They may seem indifferent. Your consistency might be taken for granted. Your emotional availability might feel like pressure to them. They may withdraw, create space, or subtly push you away, all while assuming you'll always be there when they're ready to engage again. But the moment you stop showing up in the same way, the moment you shift your energy back to yourself, they start to feel the absence. Avoidant people tend to become most aware of your value not when you're fighting to prove it, but when you finally stop trying. When the messages go unanswered, when they open their phone and realize there's no notification from you waiting, that's when the silence starts to echo. Because whether they admit it or not, they noticed your presence. They depended on your consistency more than you realized. They may not have had the words or emotional awareness to acknowledge it, but your steady care created a sense of comfort they quietly relied on. Once that pattern breaks, it disrupts their illusion of control. They assumed you'd always be there, waiting patiently while they sorted through their fears. But when you walk away, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect, it creates a shift. Suddenly, your value becomes clear. They start to remember the warmth in your voice, the way you understood them when they couldn't explain themselves, the ease with which you made space for them without judgment. What felt like pressure in the moment now feels like peace in hindsight. What felt overwhelming now feels like safety. This isn't about playing games or trying to manipulate someone into missing you. It's about what naturally happens when you reclaim your energy. When you stop centering someone who couldn't meet you halfway, they feel the weight of your absence. They may reach out, try to reestablish contact, or even come back with grand gestures. But it's not the chase that triggers their realization. It's your stillness. It's the way you let go without drama. It's the quiet confidence of someone who knows they offered something real and walked away when it was no longer being received with care. That's the moment they begin to understand what they've lost. There's a natural instinct in many of us to explain, to fix, to convince someone of our value when they start to withdraw. Especially when dealing with someone avoidant, the urge to close the emotional gap can feel overwhelming. We send long messages, seek clarity, ask what's wrong, offer reassurance, all in the hope that if we just express ourselves well enough, they'll open up, come closer, and stay. But ironically, the more you emotionally pursue someone with avoidant tendencies, the more likely they are to retreat further. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because emotional intensity feels suffocating to someone who associates closeness with losing control. When someone pulls away and you follow, they feel cornered. They're not in a place to receive love in that moment. They're trying to protect themselves. So when your emotional energy is turned up high, it can feel like pressure rather than comfort. That's why pulling away, stepping back with grace and not punishment, often triggers a very different reaction. Your stillness allows them to feel safe again, not because you're playing hard to get, but because you're no longer overwhelming them with emotional urgency. This creates space, not just physical space, but emotional breathing room. It removes the perceived threat of closeness they weren't ready to handle. And in that space, something interesting happens. Curiosity. Avoidants often start to wonder where you went. They're used to being the one to retreat, not the one who is left in silence. They begin to reflect, not always consciously, on the absence of your energy. They may not even be fully aware of the shift, but they feel it. And because the pressure is lifted, they can finally start to feel the pull of their own emotions without the need to resist yours. This is when desire begins to re-emerge. They might not come back with clarity or perfect timing, but their interest often reignites, not because you convinced them, but because you stopped trying to. The paradox is that your distance speaks louder than your words ever could. It signals that you are no longer in pursuit. And for someone who once felt overwhelmed by your presence, your absence now becomes the thing they notice most. This isn't manipulation, it's a reset. A rebalancing of the dynamic where your value isn't tied to how much effort you're giving, but to the strength of your boundaries. In that quiet withdrawal, you restore your power. And that's often the exact moment they start to feel the weight of your worth. When someone you care about starts to pull away, especially someone with avoidant tendencies, it's easy to start questioning yourself. You begin to wonder if you were too much, too emotional, too available. You replay moments, overanalyze texts, and try to pinpoint the exact thing you did that made them retreat. This self-questioning becomes a loop, and before you know it, your sense of worth is no longer anchored in who you are, but in how they respond to you. Every moment of silence feels like rejection. Every lack of response becomes a mirror reflecting what you believe to be your inadequacies. This is the trap. Because the moment your self-worth hinges on someone else's emotional availability, you've handed over your power. And with avoidant individuals who are often inconsistent in how they show up, that power transfer is exhausting and destabilizing. Their withdrawal isn't about you. It's about their internal battle with vulnerability, closeness, and emotional safety. But if you're not rooted in your own value, it's easy to take their behavior personally. You start working harder to earn connection instead of recognizing that your worth doesn't need to be earned. It already exists. No one else gets to determine how worthy you are of love, effort, or emotional presence. Your value doesn't increase because someone finally chooses you, nor does it decrease because someone can't meet you where you are. What's painful is not always what's personal. An avoidant partner may deeply care about you and still not have the capacity to build something safe and secure. That's not a reflection of your desirability. That's a reflection of where they are in their own emotional growth. When you start to separate your identity from their behavior, something inside you shifts. You stop taking their silence as proof that you're not lovable. You stop interpreting their distance as a demand to try harder. You begin to see that the real work isn't in getting them to want you. It's in continuing to want yourself, even when they don't show up the way you hoped. Your consistency with yourself must be stronger than their inconsistency with you. You are allowed to want connection. You are allowed to feel disappointment, but those feelings don't define your value. Whether someone stays or leaves, leans in or pulls back, your worth is not something they get to decide. It's something you carry with you, regardless of how others handle it. There comes a moment in any emotionally unbalanced connection when you finally get tired. Not angry, not vengeful, just tired. Tired of trying to decode mixed signals. Tired of waiting for a version of them that only shows up in fragments. Tired of feeling like you have to earn the kind of love that should have been freely given. And in that quiet exhaustion, something powerful happens. You stop chasing and start choosing yourself. That's when the entire dynamic begins to shift. Not because they suddenly changed, but because you did. When someone senses that you've emotionally detached, that you no longer place them at the center of your emotional world, it's a subtle but profound signal. You're no longer trying to be chosen, you're choosing yourself. That energy is unmistakable. It's calm, it's firm, and it doesn't ask for permission. You no longer need closure, no longer need to explain, no longer need to be understood by someone who is never listening in the first place. And without even intending to, you create contrast. They begin to feel the difference between being passively tolerated and being actively missed. Avoidant people are often most attracted to what they can't fully have. So when your energy shifts from pursuit to presence, from needing them to respecting your own peace, they start to fill the void. Not because you manipulated them or played games, but because your withdrawal highlights what they lost. You stop engaging in the emotional tug of war and the rope drops. You are no longer available in the way you once were. And that's when they start to reach. But by then, something has changed inside you. You don't need them to reach back for you to feel whole. You don't crave the validation that once consumed your thoughts. You've recentered yourself, not out of pride, but out of clarity. You see their behavior for what it is, not as a personal rejection, but as a reflection of their own internal limitations. You've stopped auditioning for a role in someone else's life and instead started writing your own. Ironically, this is often the moment they feel pulled toward you. When you are no longer emotionally entangled, when your happiness is no longer tied to their attention, you become more magnetic. You've stepped out of the performance and back into your power. They may want you again, but now the real question is, do you still want them? Because the greatest shift isn't them realizing your worth, it's you realizing it first. So when the avoidant finally realizes they still want you, it doesn't come in the dramatic movie scene way you might have imagined. It comes quietly, in the moments they feel your absence louder than your presence ever was. But by then, something essential has already happened. You've come home to yourself. You stopped negotiating your value. You stopped waiting for someone else to recognize what you finally decided to honor within you. And that shift, that's the real transformation. You see, the power was never in getting them to stay. The power was in understanding that love should not be built on fear, silence. It should be chosen freely, fully, and without conditions. And when you start living from that truth, the people who cannot meet you there fall away. Not because you weren't worthy, but because they weren't ready. And maybe, just maybe, their moment of realization comes too late. But yours came right on time. Thank you for sharing this space with me, for listening, not just with your ears, but with your heart. If you've ever felt overlooked, misunderstood, or emotionally exhausted in a connection, I hope today reminded you of one thing. You are not too much. You are just offering yourself to someone not equipped to receive you. Stay grounded in your worth. Keep choosing peace over potential. And remember, real love doesn't require you to shrink, chase, or convince. It invites you to be seen fully and honestly, just as you are. Take care of your heart. It's already more powerful than you know. Thank you, and goodbye for now.